If you love British history, don't forget to like, subscribe to the British Chronicle, and leave a comment to share your memories and stories. The pub, Britain's original social network. Long before smartphones, social media, and 24-hour news cycles, there was one place in Britain that brought people together like nothing else: the pub. More than just a place to get a pint, it was the true heart of the community, where friendships formed, romances sparked, debates raged, and stories lived and breathed across generations. You see, the British pub wasn't just a commercial establishment, it was a ritual. People didn't just go to the pub to drink, they went to feel human again after a long shift. Whether it was the steelworker in Sheffield, the dockhand in Liverpool, or the farmer from a Yorkshire village, they all found their way to that wooden bar, worn smooth by years of elbows and empty glasses. The pub was often a more welcoming place than home, especially in working-class neighborhoods where cramped housing left little room for relaxation or socializing. In fact, for many, the pub was their living room, a place not just for beer, but for warmth, conversation, and companionship, where people shared the kind of laughs and confessions that didn't always happen around the kitchen table. Historically, the explosion of pubs in Britain really began in earnest in the 19th century, thanks to the 1830 Beer House Act. This law allowed ordinary people to sell beer from their homes, and suddenly, small pubs sprouted across every town and village. Some were little more than someone's front room with a few stools and a barrel. But those humble beginnings gave rise to a national institution. The genius of the British pub lies in its flexibility. No two pubs are exactly the same. A working man's alehouse in a coal mining town felt nothing like a gin palace in the heart of London. And yet, both offered something essential: a sense of belonging. It didn't matter if you were rich or poor, young or old. Once you walked through that door, you were part of something shared. And what's even more remarkable, these weren't polished, sterile spaces designed by committee. They were messy, lived in, and deeply personal. The smell of beer-soaked wood, the sound of dominoes slapping down on a table, the murmur of conversation blending with the clink of glasses. It was all part of the fabric of life. The pub also served as a kind of cultural stage. Local bands performed. Football matches were argued over. Birthdays were toasted and funerals mourned with a quiet pint. It was a place where people went not to escape their lives but to understand them, and maybe to laugh about them too. What modern social networks promise today, connection, community, real-time updates, the pub delivered without algorithms or apps. It did it with real people in real time over real conversations. In an era of digital distraction, that kind of analog connection feels more precious than ever. The Golden Age, when every street had a local. There was a time, not too long ago, when nearly every British street had its own pub. You didn't have to plan a night out. You simply walked to the corner, opened a familiar wooden door, and stepped into what felt like an extension of your own home. This was the golden age of the pub, roughly spanning from the interwar years to the late 20th century. And if you grew up during this time, you probably remember that your local wasn't just a building. It was part of your identity. People weren't just regulars, they were characters. Everyone had their seat, everyone had their pint, and everyone knew your name long before that became a sitcom cliché. During this period, pubs became more than drinking spaces. They were the backdrop of life itself. First jobs were celebrated there, so were last paychecks. There were darts tournaments, quiz nights, Sunday roasts, and countless hours spent arguing about football, politics, and who made the best pint of bitter. Some pubs even had beer gardens that doubled as playgrounds, unofficial, of course, where kids drank lemonade while the adults laughed under fading evening light. Part of the magic was the diversity of the experience. A pub in Glasgow sounded nothing like one in Cornwall. In Manchester, the pub was a second workplace, filled with mill workers trading gossip. In London, it might be a meeting spot for musicians, poets, or actors. And in tiny villages across the countryside, the pub was often the only public building still open after dark. There was also a rhythm to pub life, anchored not in hours or happy hours, but in people. The landlady or landlord wasn't just serving drinks. They were part host, part referee, part counselor. They knew when to cut someone off gently, when to join a joke, and when to just let silence sit. These were not corporate managers, they were local legends. Economically, pubs helped entire ecosystems flourish. Breweries thrived, delivery drivers had routes, glassmakers, coopers, and bar staff all found steady work. And while profits mattered, there was still a sense that this was our place, not just a profit center. Writers and filmmakers captured this golden era perfectly. From George Orwell's dreamy essay The Moon Under Water to classic TV shows like Coronation Street, the pub was always there. Not as decoration, but as the stage where life unfolded. In fact, it's hard to find a piece of British culture from this period that doesn't include a pub scene. It was that central. But beyond nostalgia, let's be honest, this wasn't a perfect world. Some pubs excluded women or frowned on strangers. Smoking was thick in the air. Not all memories are rosy, but that's part of the point. The golden age of pubs wasn't golden because it was flawless. It was golden because it was real. It was the place you went whether you were up, down, or somewhere in between. More than beer, the social ritual of the pub. Walk into a traditional British pub, and what hits you first isn't the beer, it's the atmosphere. A mix of warmth, history, and unspoken understanding. The truth is, the pub was never just about drinking. It was about the ritual, the consistent, comforting rhythm of human connection in a changing world. There was something sacred about your seat at the bar, your usual order, the knowing nod from the landlord. You might not have even spoken a full sentence, but somehow you felt seen. It was the kind of low-pressure community gathering that's increasingly rare in today's hyper-connected, yet oddly isolating world. One of the overlooked strengths of the pub was how inclusive it eventually became. It didn't matter if you were a student, a pensioner, a builder in muddy boots, or a lawyer in a suit. The pub leveled people. It was one of the few places where people from different generations and backgrounds could share a table and a story, and maybe a packet of crisps. Some pubs rang with the sharp thunk of darts on cork. Others echoed with debates about politics or with sing-alongs around a slightly out-of-tune piano. There were always those unique, unwritten rules of pub etiquette. Don't cut in line at the bar, return your glass, and never sit in Dave's seat on a Wednesday. Kids weren't always kept outside either. In many families, it was completely normal to tag along with your parents for a Sunday visit to the local. You'd sit with a lemonade and a bag of salt and vinegar crisps while adults caught up. It wasn't irresponsible, it was integration. The pub was an intergenerational hub long before cafes and play centers tried to fill that role. In fact, the pub was a kind of oral archive. It's where local history was passed down, not in textbooks, but in exaggerated tales, half-remembered gossip, and toasts to those no longer around. The jukebox might change. The wallpaper might fade. But the core spirit of sharing, laughing, and listening stayed remarkably stable. Writers and filmmakers understood this deeply. Think of how often pubs appear in British cinema, not just as backdrops, but as characters in their own right. From the gritty realism of EastEnders to the whimsical chaos of Shaun of the Dead, the pub remains a stage where life happens in its rawest form. Even now, when many traditional pubs are fading, micropubs and community-run locals are trying to preserve this ritual. And it's not about nostalgia, it's about keeping alive a form of human interaction that doesn't depend on Wi-Fi, curated profiles, or 280 character limits. When women changed the pub. For much of history, the British pub was a man's world, a place thick with smoke, sweat, and old rules where a woman's presence was either frowned upon or segregated into a small, more respectable lounge. But something remarkable began to shift in the mid-20th century. Not through grand political revolution, but through the simple act of showing up. By the 1950s and 60s, British women were entering pubs in greater numbers, first cautiously, then confidently. What began as a few side glances and quiet pints with husbands soon evolved into groups of women claiming their own corners of the bar. And they weren't just there to accompany men. They were there to socialize, unwind, and eventually to run the place. This cultural shift mirrored bigger movements in British society. Women entering the workforce in greater numbers, demanding space not just in offices, but in every corner of public life. The pub was one of the last bastions of male exclusivity to fall, and when it did, it changed the atmosphere permanently. Pubs began to adapt. The old public bar, often bare and basic, started making room for lounge areas, softer lighting, and cleaner interiors. The addition of ladies' toilets in older establishments may seem minor today, but back then, it signaled a major shift in who was welcome. You can't underestimate the power of a well-placed door and a sign that says, "You belong here." But perhaps the most underrated transformation came behind the bar. The rise of the landlady, a figure of both warmth and authority, reshaped pub culture in ways no brewery marketing campaign ever could. She knew the names of the regulars, but also ran a tight ship. She balanced hospitality with discipline, creating spaces that felt safe, clean, and inclusive. These women weren't just employees, they were community leaders. They broke up fights, offered relationship advice, organized charity raffles, and made newcomers feel like locals. It wasn't unusual for a pub under female leadership to draw a more diverse crowd, families, couples, even groups of older women enjoying a quiet gin. This shift didn't erase the old culture. It enriched it. A darts match still clacked in the corner, but now with women on the team. Pub lunches became more than a packet of crisps and a pint, and birthday toasts might now come with a slice of cake, not just a round of beer. Let's be clear. The integration of women into pub life wasn't about making the pub more domestic or civilized. It was about making it more complete, more human. It reflected a broader truth that spaces of tradition can, and must, evolve to stay relevant. The decline. Why so many pubs are closing. Walk down almost any British high street today and you might spot them. Pubs once alive with laughter and stories, now boarded up, windows dusty, signs fading. Some still bear their old names in peeling paint, as if holding on to a final echo of who they used to be. The local pub, once a cornerstone of British life, is quietly disappearing. But why? The numbers are staggering. In the early 1980s, Britain boasted nearly 70,000 pubs. By 2024, more than 800 closed in a single year across England and Wales alone. And it's not just a statistic. Each shuttered pub represents a lost meeting place, a fractured community, and a piece of history erased. Economically, the odds are stacked against them. Rising energy bills, punishing business rates, and post-Brexit staff shortages have hit small independent pubs especially hard. While supermarkets offer crates of beer at bargain prices, publicans are stuck balancing razor-thin margins with rising overheads. A pint at the local can now cost 3 times more than drinking at home, and in a cost-of-living crisis, that matters. But the decline isn't only financial, it's deeply cultural. The pub was once the go-to space for nearly every kind of social interaction: birthday parties, wake toasts, Friday pints after work. But times have changed. Millennials and Gen Z drink less, and when they do, they often choose cocktails, wine bars, or craft beer tap rooms. For them, the traditional pub, with its sticky carpets and limited menus, feels outdated. The rise of alternative social spaces has also reshaped habits. Cafes, co-working hubs, even gyms have taken over some of the pub's former roles as places of connection. Add in streaming platforms and food delivery apps, and suddenly, many prefer a quiet night in over a loud night out. Then there's the smoking ban introduced in 2007. While undoubtedly a public health win, it dealt a psychological blow to regulars for whom smoking and socializing were intertwined. For some, the pub lost its soul when the smoke cleared. And perhaps most significantly, urban development and property speculation have turned pubs into real estate targets. Developers see a quaint old building, not as a community asset, but as a potential block of flats. Local councils, short on funding, often lack the power or will to protect them. What we're witnessing isn't just market forces at work, it's a dismantling of shared cultural spaces. The pub used to be a place where time slowed, where people connected offline, where you didn't need a reservation, a Wi-Fi password, or a curated Instagram feed. You just walked in, ordered a pint, and belonged. Can the pub be saved? Despite the grim headlines and boarded-up windows, the story of the British pub isn't over. In fact, it might just be entering a new chapter, one fueled not by nostalgia, but by resilience, creativity, and community. Let's start small, literally. The rise of micropubs, tiny venues focused on conversation, real ale, and simplicity, has quietly carved out a place in the modern landscape. These are pubs without blaring TVs or slot machines. No loud music, no gimmicks, just a room, a good pint, and the hum of human voices. In many ways, they're a return to the essence of what the pub once was, a space to gather, to talk, to belong. These aren't chains. They're often run by locals who care deeply about keeping community at the core, and they're thriving not in spite of modern challenges, but because they offer what so many other venues now lack: genuine connection. Meanwhile, other pubs are transforming. The rise of gastropubs and hybrid spaces shows how the traditional alehouse is evolving to meet new expectations. Instead of dusty jukeboxes and frozen pies, some pubs now offer craft beers alongside gourmet burgers, artisanal coffees, even book clubs or live acoustic nights. And it's working. When done well, these revamped pubs attract younger generations who might have otherwise walked on by. There's also power in people-powered preservation. Across the UK, dozens of pubs have been rescued by their communities, turned into cooperatives, social hubs, even libraries or post offices. Campaigns like Pub is the Hub prove that a pub doesn't need to be just about pints. It can be a food pantry, a town hall, or a lifeline in a rural village. These initiatives don't just save buildings, they restore a sense of place. Because the truth is, we still need places like pubs, not just for drinks, but for stories, for chance encounters, for remembering that we're part of something bigger than our screens. The challenge ahead is cultural as much as commercial. If the next generation grows up without seeing the pub as a natural part of community life, then no amount of reinvention will save it. We need to teach not just what pubs were, but what they can still be: inclusive, evolving, and open to all. The golden age of pubs might be behind us. But golden ages don't need to be repeated. They can be reimagined.